Hello everyone. Hello. My name is Daniel Gomeli. Welcome back to my channel. Unfortunately, lighting is very bad here. In this video, we will think like Russian. There's a guy called Sergei Pereslavtsev. Sure about. I apologize for pronunciation. He's something like Pereslavtsev. Now, when I saw the surname, it reminded me a little bit of Shimon Peres, right? So it could be a Jewish name. So I think Shimon Peres potentially an Israeli politician. I'm not. Yeah, again, my knowledge is not so great. So it's Russian, potentially. Sergei is a Russian name, as is Alex to some extent. However, might be some Jewish heritage there. I don't know. Anyway, I apologise if I've offended anyone. Essex League is very kind. So Alex is his son, and he's plays in the Essex League, presumably on board one. Playing against Richard Pert. He's a brother of Nick Pert, who I did a commentary with, a British twin brother. So they're two very strong players, obviously, Richard and Nick. I think Richard's actually slightly older by a few minutes, but anyway. Richard is a good player. I mean, I played him. I've actually lost to him recently in 4 CL. Let's have a look at the game anyway. So Alex was black. Let's have a look at the game, how the game went. So D4, knight f6, knight f3, g6. So Alex is, I think he's only about 14, right? And he's quite highly rated for a 14-year-old. He's already rated about 2,000. So obviously a decent player. Knight bd2. By the way, when I go e4 here, I remember this old Joe Gallagher book. I think he recommended you go d5. I'm pretty certain about that. Because one of the ideas is after, say, e5, you put the knight in on e4. And when they go bishop d3, I think you go c5 from memory. And then you quickly put the knight on c6. However, another very typical way that white would play is to take the pawn on d5, then you take with the knight. And then you play something like bishop c4, I believe. Now that's supposed to be a tiny bit better for white, but nothing special. I mean, really, the Torre attack is not, considered to be cutting edge theory, but it's reasonable. I mean, Richard tends to play these kind of systems where he avoids playing main lines. Plays stuff like the London system, Tromposky. Torre attack is a reasonable shout. I've actually had quite a lot of success from the white side of the Torre attack in recent years because you get a very solid position. My problem is often getting out the opening, either with white or with black. If you get a very solid position, you can outplay people in the middle game. So I have a reasonable record. I did lose a game against Jim Plaskett back in the day in the Torre attack, and also against Jonathan Rowson in a tournament in, I think it was somewhere like Bunratty. On the white side, but in recent years I've tended to have quite a lot of success with it. I've very rarely lost with it from what I can remember, and I've won quite a few games, so it's quite a good surprise weapon. Bishop d3 by Richard. I'm slightly getting confused. I think c3 is also a way you can play as well, right? I'm slightly surprised by bishop d3, but now maybe that's his. After castles you can either put the bishop on e2 or put the bishop on the c4. Normally they put the bishop. I think there's lines like this, right? You take. There's old theory like knight c6, something like rook e1 or queen e2, and then black would generally put the queen on c7. Maybe I'm getting mixed up here, and I'm thinking about lines where bishop's on f4 or bishop's on g5. I think I'm getting mixed up with lines. I think I'm getting mixed up with these lines. Sorry. Yeah, so this is what I'm thinking of, which would also relate to d5 earlier. That you get this, and after this you get bishop c4, knight c6, castles. Something like this happens, and then black goes h6, and then tries to go knight h5, and sometimes b6. And it's all well-known theory. But, okay, playing with knight bd2, that's slightly different. Sorry, I'm getting confused about. I mean, you could legitimately say, well, d5 is probably the best move here because white's giving up the centre. So that's one way to potentially play. Bishop g7. Obviously, this is a reasonable way to play as well. You get a kind of a perk structure as black. lots of ways. I mean, knight c6 is slightly appealing, I would say. Would maybe have been tempted to go knight c6 there. d5 I'm not necessarily worried about because of knight b4, for example. d5 is a potential way to play for white. c3 is probably what would have been played. Now you could go e5 here as black, or you could maybe think about other moves as well. But knight bd7 was played, which is not, doesn't look like a great move to me. Actually, I wonder if white could have considered e5, because after d5, something like this feels slightly dubious for black, in my opinion. It's typical thematic pawn sacrifice. You probably have to take, because otherwise I'm taking on f7 for nothing, and I'm going to fracture a pawn chain. Now the question is whether this is enough compensation or not. It should be sufficient compensation. Whether it's, I'm not sure it's better for white though. That's the only question. You could go bishop c4, and then after knight d5, takes, bishop b3, follow up with queen e2 quickly. Although black's also got reasonable moves like king h8 they can play there, followed by c5. Yeah, another way is maybe just queen e2 immediately is another possibility, or knight e4 or knight g5. Interesting play. I mean, also in this line, black can also put the knight on d5. Maybe that was what Richard wasn't sure about. But I'd probably still go either take first and then go knight d5, and probably knight d5 immediately. Because if you go after e5, if you go here, I think this is sort of thing that white would be quite happy about, because of the fact that your knight is now on a slightly awkward square. But if you go knight d5 immediately, maybe I could consider going e6 anyway. Is this something, or is this just nothing? No, I guess you can just go there, can you? But then rook e1 or queen e2, I've got quite good. Queen e2, knight f4. So yeah, it's not 100% clear anyway. So he went rook e1, Richard. Patient move. And again, I certainly would be seriously considering about playing e5 here. I'm slightly surprised you can go e5 in this position. c3 surprises me. e5 I would have thought about. I mean, Richard actually a good player. He nearly came equal first in the British this year. Lost last round. If he'd have won against Peter Roberson with white, I think he was a little bit nervous in that game, I'll be honest. Didn't play very well at all compared to how he played in the tournament before that. But Roberson did play very well. If he'd have won that game, he would have got into the playoff. Yeah, this is not 100% clear either. You know, you can still take and go knight g4. So, okay, he decided not to do that. He played c3. So a6 is played. Slow move, but effective. a4, yeah. The only problem with a4 is when black takes, which is not such a problem here because the knight's on d7 rather than c6. But when you take and you take back the pawn, because you don't generally want to take back the knight, I wouldn't have thought, because then you can take back the knight, but I think you lose some edge here. This doesn't feel very critical, but it is playable. But if you take back the pawn, you're losing some control over the b4 square. So if the black knight was on c6, you know, the knight could find a very nice square here on b4, but in this position, I would be very tempted to take anyway. I'm always think with amateur players, you know, even good players, even experienced players like myself and Richard, we often underestimate pawn captures. And it feels like taking feels natural here, and then just going here. Although now I think about it, there is knight c4, which might be slightly annoying. Or maybe not, I don't know. But if you go d5, then I'm very happy there. I go knight c5. Well, I say very happy. It's just a game. But if you go knight c4, I can consider taking knight d6, knight c5 is a move, or even take on d4, knight d6, knight e5 is an option. Knight c8, knight f3, queen f3, rook c8, e5, knight d7, queen b7, knight takes e5. And if bishop a6, Maybe somebody like rook c2 would counterplay. Let's say bishop f4. You could play legitimately, maybe make a move like knight g4 or queen h4 or queen f6. Queen f6 with the idea, bishop e5, queen f2. But then you're defending g2, right? King h1, bishop e5, rook e5, d3, bishop takes d3. There's also rook takes b2 there, maybe, instead of d3. But okay, we've got a little bit far, but that is a possible line. But black played b6 in the game, which, again, very surprised that white is not playing e5 here. It was really screaming at me to be played, especially after b6. You know, this is something. I think it's just I lack patience. I just like. Also, I feel like with Richard, he's kind of quite an aggressive player, so he feels like he's often happy. I've noticed in his games, he's often happy to sack balls. It's kind of a similar style to me, really. Likes playing the initiative, but fairly solid overall. But likes playing the initiative, likes gambit lines. Generally quite an accurate player. Doesn't make big mistakes. So yeah, I think his chess and my chess are very similar actually. And he also goes to 1d4. But slightly surprised that he didn't. Okay, when knight f1 anyway, bishop b7. Yeah, this is also reasonable because your knights, you funneled your knight around to reasonable square. And now e5 is less tempting now because I think it would just be bad because of this, for example. Sorry, bishop takes f3. And after this you have knight e5, which is a problem for white. So go back to this position. He went bishop g5. Yeah, I'd be tempted with knight g4 there because it would probably force the bishop to move again. But again, what have you achieved with that? Maybe not a lot. Okay, so it's probably not a great option. So went e5. Rook fe8. Again, a serious consideration about taking now. Before they trade, you could also consider taking yourself. Now, what's the assessment of this position? It feels okay for black, actually. It feels okay. The pawn on g6 is limiting the knight on g3, which is one good feature about black's position. However, after knight takes d4, you are ready to go rook c1, hit the queen. Maybe in some variations you could even consider knight f5 sacking the piece. Not sure. Maybe rook ae8 would be played. Because if rook fe8, then rook c1, where does the queen go? It might have to block the rook. It's also knight c5 is a counter move here, but maybe not a very good one because again runs into rook c1. Yeah, I'd be tempted to either play rook c8 or rook ae8 here. Maybe rook ae8. Okay, I feel like taking. I probably would have taken. It feels too slow what black's doing. I'll play a bit quicker. Rook fe8 feels a bit slow. Both players played a bit slow here in this game, in my opinion, but it's not terrible play at all. But slightly surprising, in my opinion. But white is playing a good positional moves. Knight d2 is a good move. Yeah, interesting now. Actually, already it seems like black's doing quite well here. Oh, but there is an issue with queen b3, so maybe that's why I went there, because he didn't want to allow queen b3, because knight e6, queen b3 actually is annoying. Although you could go knight f4 there, and then after bishop drops back, then play rook e6, but feels slightly surprising. So here, yeah, he did play bishop c6 first, and then he went knight e6. Yeah. So this feels already quite reasonable for black. With a knight on e6 is a great piece. It's a really strong play by black, actually, over the last few moves. f3, not a bad move, but not necessarily a move you necessarily want to play because you've already played h3. Again, I don't know the analysis on this game. I'm just going for it without an engine. We can check with an engine later. So black in this position played a slightly controversial move, h5. So typically in these positions where you've castled on the king side, you've got your bishop on g7. F5 is a break here. But I think in this particular position, F5 is not really a good option for black because pawn on E4 is stopping there and there's a knight on G3. So black decides, in order to make progress on the king side, decides to play H5, which looks like a very natural move. So white decided it didn't want to allow that at all. It went H4 because pawn... Oh no, it didn't go H4, sorry. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong move. It played B4, which is a more aggressive move. So we got this position. After knight H1, I would already assess this position actually as better for black. How much better for black, I'm not sure, but it feels better for black because first you got a hold on D3, which it could be an issue for white. Secondly, your pieces are slightly passive. Your bishop on F1 is blocked by the pawn on C4. Even though you got the bishop pair, which obviously that's a good thing, it feels slightly uncomfortable to say the least. I mean, King H7 actually is a move that I would have been tempted by, with the idea of Bishop H6. Because if I trade dark square bishops, then I could have total command over the dark squares. So that would be something that I would consider in the game. I'd also look at a move like H4 with the idea of Knight H5. Knight F4, what does it do? That would be my question. I would certainly think, yeah, maybe I'm exaggerating when I'm saying that black is doing well, but I don't really like Knight F4 because I feel that it doesn't really threaten. Well, maybe it threatens Knight D3, I guess, but... So Richard called the bluff, he just went G3. I would have been tempted with Knight, but Knight F2 he understands that H4 is a problem, positionally. And in fact, black should play that move earlier. Maybe even here, because let's say you went Queen F2, I could even just go G5. You know, okay, it looks ugly to give you that square on E3, but how do you ever get the knight round to F5? Oh, the square on F5, sorry. How do you ever get the knight round to F5? Computer would probably do this. And then we go knight H5 and rook F8 and F5 and attack. Or knight H5, knight F4. Let's say the other option I would consider is King H7. With the idea of Bishop H6, which you probably can't prevent in the long run, because if you go Queen C1, I could even go Knight G8. And I'm already starting to think about Rook F8 and F5 actually. So, although there is always AB, Rook A7. So, white wants to probably attack on the A file. So, it could be a question of time. He goes Knight F4, G3, good move, I would say. Not worried about Knight D3 because he feels... Well, Knight D3, I would certainly consider it. It's certainly a move that an engine would look at. You know, very much so. I mean, engines probably want to give up material here, don't they? I mean, I guess after Rook here, I'm certainly thinking about this move. And looks scary, actually, because takes, queen takes. I've already got 2 pawns, and I've got quite a good initiative for the piece. But whether that's enough, I don't know. Another move you consider is H4, because G4 is giving the G5 square. Yeah, H4 actually, because here actually I could just jump back, which must be quite reasonable for black if I just got complete control over F4 forever. So I would have probably gone Knight D3 there. You know, it's like the old saying, Russians never go back. And Alex is a Russian, so he should know that. You know where that saying came from? I think it came from the Second World War, where it's just like Stalingrad, and you know, they were they did this defense of Stalingrad, where they basically, you know, you'd have to use flamethrowers to get them out of their hidey holes. Do you know what I mean? Quite interesting in history and geography. Is a good geography question I thought of earlier. What's the most populous island in the world? Try and say at the end of the video. Most populous island. Knight A4. I should have been a geography teacher or a history teacher rather than chess teacher, which earns no money. At least I'd have a salary, right? Bishop C1. Yeah, so we're getting into manoeuvring phase. White's just trying to hold the fort. Queen D6. Trades. Knight E3. Now g5 was played. I don't really love g5 because I feel like now the knight is ready to jump into f5 or d5, which is something that I would be concerned about. But what other moves you can play, I'm not sure. I might play an improving move like king g7. I'm a little bit concerned about knight coming in. Could I consider knight b6? Maybe. Doesn't feel terrible. Not clear how white makes progress. I guess he puts the queen. Oh, maybe he can move the queen. Yeah, probably white's got more options here than black. So he went g5. Bishop e3 was played. Yeah. Yeah, it feels better for white now, if anything. And he took a pawn. Queen came back. Queen went to h6. King g2. Queen g5. Queen f2. Queen c1. So eventually you had this ending. Now, the theory may be that it's possibly, it should have been a draw, maybe. I'm not sure. So went queen h4, the idea king g6. What is happening after king g6? Is it knight e7 or is it queen h8? Or is it just takes? Anyway, he took. And he went king g7. Yeah, I mean king g6 I would probably play just to... If the knight moves away from d5, then I'm quite happy because then I'm hitting c3. So I don't really see... Well, I guess you have to go king g4 to try and make progress, right? But is that enough? Yeah, maybe that's a problem actually. Not sure. Because king h6, king f5 looks awkward to say the least. You could go knight b2 though, but then that allows knight c7, so then you're hitting b5. And then when you go knight d1, you just take on b5 anyway. Although I could still go check and then knight back. Yeah, it's questionable because the king can slowly come around to d2 and then you can move knight away. So possibly that wouldn't have held. So he went king g7. King f5, king h6, knight b2. Yeah, so he did end up losing that pawn in the end. And then b5. Interesting endgame. So the problem is obviously the b pawn is a runner now. Now I could go knight g5 because of b6 I can still come back king d7, right? So maybe knight g5 is a move. You could go knight d2, but then I come across king d6. King g6, king c5, c4. Yeah, how do I stop you taking on f6? I could play... yeah, I don't see a good move there. Yeah, so, okay, so he tried king d7, and then the king came in, so he kind of got... knight e5, this looks lost now. King f5, c5, king b7, knight c4, knight f3, king takes, and then white won. Black decided to give up the game. So let's go back from the start and check with the engine, see what the engine was saying. Fritz 19, even though it's Fritz 20, I should upgrade. But I have to pay though to upgrade, right? They didn't just give you a free upgrade, did they? Or should just download Stockfish or the latest version of Stockfish, but can't be bothered. Right, yeah, I said d5 here instead of bishop g7. That is the top move according to the engine. It's the best move. But of course d6 in that. I mean, I quite possibly would go d6 myself because it's more dynamic to go d6. D5 is a little bit dull, but the engine slightly prefers it. Okay, so bishop d3. I said knight c6 might have been better. Yeah, knight c6. No, it says about the same, right? Knight bd7, knight c6. This has all been analysed before as well. Knight bd7. I did mention e5 as a current move. It doesn't hate it, but doesn't think it's that great either. Doesn't think it's any better than what happened in the game. Rook e1, top move, c5. Yeah, now it's starting to like e5 a bit more. It also likes d5, just gaining the space, because the point is after d5, it's a little bit like these lines in the bishop b5 Czech Sicilian, which is the Moscow variation, I believe. Keep talking about history, right? Moscow. So the Russians got, even though they didn't conquer Stalingrad, they got as far as Moscow. They got to the outskirts of Moscow, but they didn't quite penetrate. The Germans, sorry, during the Second World War, Operation Barbarossa, which I believe was launched something like 1941 or something like that. Or maybe it was 1940, I can't remember. Late 1940s, something like 1941. Yeah, because the problem is, even though it kind of limits what white can do to a certain extent as well, but apparently you just go a4, you start gaining space, and you've got a nice position. e5, I was saying, quite like e5 here now, yeah. I think the more moves that black throws in, the more it's going to like, certainly after a6, yeah, that's what I said, like e5. Around about this point, or certainly after a4, b6, you're screaming to play e5, which I'm very surprised at, which you can play that with. Especially as he's quite a good attacking player. It feels like that's the move, right? And then after knight f1, and I said instead of b6, you could have just traded. Yeah, that was the top line, right? Trade e5, right? Yeah, because I think knight d4 is very insipid. It's really giving white nothing, so you kind of have to maintain the centre. But e5 should give black good play. Knight c4. Also mentioned this slide, didn't we? We said knight e5 was maybe even the move. Another possibility. I think actually maybe better is probably prefers white here, but probably better moves than knight e5. Just knight g4. Or queen c7. Sometimes it takes a while for the evaluation to kick up. Queen c pick up the depth. Yeah, knight g4 is a move here. Interesting move. Looks a bit weird, but your idea is just to quickly get some counterplay with bishop f6. Another move that he quite likes is queen c7. So this is quite a reasonable way to play for white, or for black. Well, but it's okay for both sides. But b6 like a red rag to a ball. I'm playing e5 here every day on a Sunday, right? Knight f1 felt a bit slow. Knight g3, queen c7. Yeah, bishop g5. It likes h4 here, and I think the reason is computers love playing h4 when the centre's not under any pressure, as is the case here. The black isn't really putting a lot of pressure on the centre here, so it's got one capture, but we're defending that. So when you don't have any central play, then you can start to think about playing with your h-pawn, h4, h5 to try and get out of the black king, or gain some very useful space on the king side. But now he's changed his mind. He prefers queen e2, bishop g5. I know Sat Richard's games, he likes put his bishop on g5. He's a big fan of Tromposky. Knight g4 I said maybe was possible, but e5 is actually top move, good. h3, again this is where I'm thinking about trading. Why didn't d5 was apparent, yeah, dynamic pawn moves, right? d5 was the top move. I mean I suggested trading, which I think is probably okay for black. But it seems to slightly prefer white. So actually, a d5 was the best move. The reason is, and black is at least equal. In fact, it's slightly keeps changing his mind. Slightly preferring white. Well, no, but yeah, it's quite reasonable move. d5, very typical idea actually in the Pert modern, where you've got the pawn already on e5 and you just go d5 and you blow up the centre. And by blowing up the centre, you exchange off a lot of material. And once you change off a lot of material, you get rid of the centre, then the bishop on g7, bishop on b7 are obviously going to be well placed. So, yeah, now white can be comfortable again. Although over the next few moves, black was in good shape. Bishop c6. So this is where I said that f3, not very happy with f3. In general, because you've already gone h3, h5 was reasonable, Play b4. So I was right that black was better, although he's only a tiny bit better. And king h7 was the top move with the idea of going bishop h6. Yeah, which doesn't surprise me. h4 was also a reasonable option as well. It actually likes knight h7 as well with the idea of maybe trying to play for f5, but h4 is also not bad. Knight f4. I think after g3 you've got to go knight d3 here. No, yeah, knight d. No, actually, it doesn't mind knight e6. I quite like knight d3 here. Though I just think from a human aspect, just playing like this must be very comfortable. Knight e6 is still quite light as black. After h4, good move. I wanted to go knight d4, yeah. Was there that line as well where it was I was sacking a piece of knight e4? He probably doesn't like that. No, he doesn't mind it. It thinks it's unclear. In fact, yeah. Interesting. So from a practical point of view, that would have been scary for white and me. You don't really want to put the rook on e2 here, because rook on e2 would you can take on d3 as well, of course, but that's a little bit depressing. Yeah, rook d1, knight e4 is actually maybe the top line, it thinks. Yeah. Rook e2 looks a bit ugly because you're blocking the bishop on f1. So actually after this, knight e6 and knight d4 was tremendous, which is just a tough move to see though. It's kind of obvious that if you take, then black is getting huge play, but it's still, because you feel like you can just defend that pawn anyway, but then it likes having a knight on b3 because it controls d2 square. Also attacks a rook. So maybe around about this point, black started to get a little bit outplayed and started to lose the thread of the game. Although not to a significant amount, but got a slightly uncomfortable position. And here you're still okay, you can play. What about knight b6? Is that still playable? It's still fine. g5, I didn't like g5. I said that, didn't I? Yeah, I felt like that was. It just felt positionally wrong. Instinctive. It's like when I'm playing chess. It's like what's instinctively my first move, and my first instinct is not g5 because it looks too weak. I don't mind. I like the fact he played it in a way because it shows not as kind of fearless, that you're not afraid of creating weaknesses, but you've got to like rein it in a little bit. You know, g5 just creates too bigger holes in black's position. Again, might have been time trouble problems. Knight d5 was not the best. Yeah, knight f5 looks like a more natural square than knight d5. But still, white's better. Well, apparently that was also wrong. It's like, no, it's okay, it's fine. Or it was a toothache or gum ache or whatever. Yeah, I've got all these physical problems where you seem to get when you get older. I was alright for a while. I could smile for a while. But then I saw you. Okay, Ryder Cup starts today, by the way. I think Team USA might win, but it's not certain. Could be a draw. Could be a draw. Got his Scheffler's probably going to perform well, as he always does. Yeah, this is a winning for white, apparently. I didn't like g5. Because I think, yeah, queen h4, you're worried about all the checks, right? But apparently it's winning. It's still better for white, this position. In fact, you should have just moved the king. Yeah, I said king g6, but this is trouble. In fact, that was a mistake. Should have gone king g4. You can imagine that both players are short of time here. It's quite deep into the game, and you probably don't get extra time. One of these sort of time controls, you don't get extra time on move 40. Yeah, this is just winning, right? Yeah, I wasn't sure, but knight e5, great move, and then he cleaned up. So, what would I say about that game? I think both players made mistakes, but I think Alex, obviously Richard, played well towards the end of the game. So he seems to be doing well in the end games. I thought Alex, a couple of things he could work on. Maybe be more aggressive when he's got the initiative. You know, rather than the moments there where he went back. When he got a good position, he went back with 96. Which computer in mind, but then you have to. The thing is, the computer likes it because it plays knight d4 later, which is a tough move to find for a human player. Whereas I think you've already got a good move there in knight d3. You just play it. So there's certain things you need to work on, and also it's obviously towards the end. G5 was a positional error, but again that might have been a time trouble mistake. Anyway, thanks for sending me the game. You know, send me your games, guys. I love playing through chess. I love chess, me. I love it. I love it. I love it. Even though I'm always insulting amateur players, I love chess. You know, I love insulting amateur players. It's my favourite thing to do. But yeah, no, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed playing for that game. Thanks again. Essex League, Brentwood, massive. Where's Brentford? How close is that to the coast? Probably reason. I think Essex does a Southend is on the coast, isn't it? That's in Essex. Pretty sure about that. So it's not far away from the coast. What's the capital of Essex, or the county town of Essex? I think it's something like Colchester, right? Which used to be an old Roman settlement, I believe. Anyway, I'm boring. Stansted is also in Essex, I believe, which is airport. Flew from there recently. Anyway, thanks again for sending me the game, and thanks for watching, everybody. Please like and subscribe. Please leave your comments down below. I'm always fascinated with your comments. Getting some great comments on the YouTube recently. People even batting back at my humiliation of amateur players and talking about how amateur players can't improve and all that kind of nonsense. Please attack me in your comments. I love it. I love it. Thanks again for watching my video.